Have you ever looked in the mirror and felt like you were staring at a stranger? Like the person everyone expects you to be is slowly suffocating the real you inside? What if I told you that breakdown you're experiencing isn't your mind falling apart, it's your soul breaking free? And what if a Roman emperor from 2000 years ago already mapped out exactly what neuroscientists are just now discovering about the most terrifying yet liberating experience a human can have? Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled the greatest empire in history, wrote in his private journal about a process he called the dissolution of the false self. He described moments when everything you think you are simply ... disappears. Your name, your roles, your entire identity gone. And in that terrifying emptiness, something far more powerful emerges. Something your brain has been secretly preparing for your entire life. Modern neuroscience now has a name for what Marcus Aurelius experienced: ego death. And the latest brain imaging studies reveal something shocking. When your sense of self dissolves, your brain doesn't break down, it breaks through. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change how you see every crisis, every breakdown, and every moment you felt like you're losing yourself. Because maybe, just maybe, you're finally finding who you really are. Asterisk, the emperors. Secret, what Marcus Aurelius knew about the false self. Asterisk, picture this. The most powerful man in the ancient world, sitting alone in his tent on the Germanic frontier, writing to himself in the dead of night. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, commander of legions, ruler of millions. Yet, in his private journal, never meant for anyone else's eyes, he wrote something that would make modern psychologists' jaws drop. You are nothing but an actor, playing a role that was written for you by others. This wasn't some philosophical musing. This was a man who had discovered what neuroscientists today call the constructed self. The identity you think is you, but is actually just a collection of other people's expectations, childhood survival mechanisms, and social programming, running on autopilot in your brain. Marcus called this the false emperor within. The part of you that's constantly performing, constantly trying to control how others see you, constantly exhausted from maintaining an image that was never really you to begin with. Sound familiar? That voice in your head that says, I need to have it all together. I can't let them see me struggle. I have to be successful to be worthy. That's your false emperor talking. But here's where it gets wild. Marcus Aurelius discovered something that modern brain imaging is now confirming. This false self isn't just a psychological concept. It's literally a network in your brain called the default mode network. And it's the source of most human suffering. Recent fMRI studies from Harvard and Johns Hopkins show that this network, responsible for your inner narrator, your thinking, your constant mental chatter about me, myself, and I, becomes hyperactive in people with depression, anxiety, and trauma. It's the part of your brain that creates the stories. I'm not good enough. Everyone's judging me. I need to keep it together or everything will fall apart. Marcus Aurelius wrote, how much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself. He understood that the false self feeds on comparison, validation, and control. It's constantly scanning for threats to its image, constantly trying to maintain the performance. And that performance is exhausting your nervous system. But here's what blew my mind when I first read Marcus's personal writings. He didn't just identify the problem, he described the solution. He wrote about moments when this false emperor would suddenly go quiet, when all the mental noise would stop, when the need to perform, to control, to maintain the image would simply ... disappear. In the morning when thou risest unwillingly, he wrote, let this thought be present. I am rising to the work of a human being. What have I to complain of, if I am going to do the things for which I exist, and for which I was brought into the world? This isn't just morning motivation. This is a man describing what happens when you stop identifying with the false self and start connecting with something deeper. Modern neuroscience has a name for what Marcus was experiencing: ego dissolution, and brain scans of people going through this process show something extraordinary. When the default mode network quiets down, when that constant mental chatter stops, other parts of the brain light up like a Christmas tree. Regions responsible for creativity, empathy, spiritual experience, and what researchers call oceanic consciousness, become hyperactive. It's as if your brain has been waiting your whole life for the false self to get out of the way so the real you can finally emerge. And Marcus Aurelius, without any modern technology, somehow figured this out through pure self-observation and philosophical practice. But here's the terrifying part that Marcus also understood. The death of the false self feels like actual death. Your ego will fight this process with everything it has because, from its perspective, if it dies, you die. Your nervous system will panic. You'll feel like you're losing your mind, losing yourself, losing everything that made you ... You, Marcus, wrote, "Death smiles at us all, but all a man can do is smile back." He wasn't talking about physical death. He was talking about the death of who you thought you were. And he understood that this death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more real, far more powerful, and far more aligned with your true nature. The question is, are you ready to let your false emperor die so your true self can finally be born? Asterisk, the neuroscience of rebirth, your brain on ego death. Asterisk, so you're in the middle of what feels like a complete mental breakdown. Everything you thought you knew about yourself is crumbling. The voice in your head that usually narrates your life has gone eerily quiet. You're not sure if you're having a spiritual awakening or losing your mind. And that's exactly when something incredible starts happening in your brain. Dr. Robin Carhart at Imperial College London has spent the last decade scanning the brains of people experiencing ego dissolution, and what he's discovered would have made Marcus Aurelius nod in recognition. When your sense of self dissolves, your brain doesn't shut down. It explodes into new patterns of connectivity that researchers are calling the entropic brain state. Think of your normal brain like a city during rush hour. Traffic flows in, predictable patterns, same routes, same destinations, same congestion points. That's your default mode network in action, running the same mental loops. I need to check my phone. What will people think? I should be further along in life. It's efficient, but it's limiting. But when ego death kicks in, it's like every traffic light in the city goes out simultaneously. Suddenly, cars are taking routes they've never taken before. Neighborhoods that never communicated are suddenly connected. The whole system becomes more fluid, more creative, more alive. That's what's happening in your brain during ego dissolution. Brain regions that normally operate independently start talking to each other in ways they never have before. Your logical left brain starts harmonizing with your intuitive right brain. Your emotion centers connect directly with your creativity centers. Your memory banks open up conversations with your pattern recognition systems. It's like your brain is finally having the conversation. It's been waiting to have your entire life. And here's the kicker. This isn't random neural chaos. Recent studies published in Nature show that brains in ego dissolution states actually become more organized, not less. They develop what scientists call increased neural complexity, more sophisticated, more integrated patterns of activity. Marcus Aurelius described this state in his Meditations. Constantly regard the universe as one living being, having one substance and one soul. He was describing the direct experience of what neuroscientists now call oceanic consciousness, the felt sense that the boundaries between self and universe are artificial constructs. But here's what's really wild. This neural rewiring doesn't just happen during the experience, it creates lasting changes in your brain structure. Studies on people who've gone through profound ego dissolution experiences show increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, responsible for empathy and emotional regulation, and decreased activity in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. For months or even years afterward, it's like your brain gets a software update that makes you less reactive to stress, more compassionate toward others, and more connected to meaning and purpose. Participants in clinical trials report lasting reductions in depression, anxiety, and PTSD symptoms. They describe feeling more like themselves than ever before, which is paradoxical since they've just experienced the dissolution of their self. But Marcus Aurelius would have understood this paradox perfectly. He wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. When the false self dies, what remains isn't nothing, it's everything. You realize you're not separate from life. You are life, temporarily experiencing itself through a human nervous system." This is where modern neuroscience gets really exciting. Researchers are discovering that ego death activates what they call the spiritual brain, neural networks associated with awe, transcendence, and connection to something greater than yourself. These are the same networks that light up during profound meditation, near-death experiences, and moments of creative breakthrough. Dr. Judson Brewer at Yale found that people who regularly experience ego dissolution show increased activity in brain regions associated with what Buddhists call effortless awareness, a state where you're fully present and engaged, but not identified with the constant stream of thoughts and emotions. Marcus Aurelius called this state the view from above, the ability to step back from your personal drama and see your life from a broader, more universal perspective. He wrote, "You can commit injustice by doing nothing. When you're not caught up in the small self's concerns, you naturally become more connected to what serves the larger whole." The implications are staggering. What if depression, anxiety, and existential crisis aren't signs that something's wrong with you, but signs that your brain is trying to evolve beyond the limitations of the false self? What if your breakdowns are actually breakthrough attempts? The integration crisis, why most people get stuck after ego death. Asterisk, here's what nobody tells you about ego death. The dissolution isn't the hard part. The hard part is what comes next. You've just experienced the most profound shift in consciousness possible. You've seen through the illusion of the separate self, touched something infinite, and felt more real than you've ever felt in your life. And then you have to go back to paying taxes, making small talk, and pretending like your entire worldview hasn't just been turned inside out. This is what therapists call the integration crisis, and it's where most people get completely lost. You can't unsee what you've seen, but you also can't live in that expanded state permanently. You need an ego to function in the world, to remember your name, pay your bills, maintain relationships. But how do you rebuild an identity that honors both your transcendent experience and your human needs? Marcus Aurelius faced this exact challenge. As emperor, he couldn't just retreat to a cave and contemplate the universe. He had to make life and death decisions for millions of people, while simultaneously holding the awareness that all of it, the empire, his role, even his own identity, was ultimately impermanent and constructed. His solution was what he called the discipline of action, learning to play your role in life fully, while never forgetting that it's just a role. He wrote, "In the morning when thou risest unwillingly, let this thought be present: I am rising to the work of a human being." Notice he didn't say, "I am a human being." He said he was rising to do the work of one. The difference is crucial. Modern psychology is finally catching up to what Marcus understood. 2,000 years ago, Dr. Stanislav Graf, who studied consciousness for over 50 years, identified what he calls spiritual emergency, the crisis that occurs when expanded states of consciousness aren't properly integrated into everyday life. The symptoms are predictable: feeling disconnected from your old life, unable to relate to people who haven't had similar experiences, questioning everything you once found meaningful, experiencing what psychologists call derealization, the sense that ordinary reality feels fake or dreamlike. But here's where most people make a critical mistake. They try to either completely reject their transcendent experience, "It was just my imagination," or completely reject ordinary reality, "Nothing matters because it's all an illusion." Both approaches lead to what Marcus Aurelius would have called spiritual bypassing, using spiritual insights to avoid the hard work of being human. The brain imaging studies back this up. People who get stuck in integration crisis show continued disruption in their default mode network, without the development of new, healthy neural patterns. It's like they've demolished the old house but never built a new one. They're living in a construction zone indefinitely. Dr. Lisa Miller at Columbia University has identified what she calls the awakened brain, neural patterns found in people who successfully integrate transcendent experiences. These brains show decreased activity in the default mode, network-less ego-driven thinking, but increased connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, better emotional regulation and decision-making. In other words, successful integration creates a brain that's less neurotic but more functional, less self-obsessed but more effective, less reactive but more responsive. This is exactly what Marcus Aurelius was describing when he wrote about being like a rock against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it. But integration doesn't happen automatically. It requires what Marcus called the discipline of desire, learning to want what serves your highest good rather than what temporarily satisfies the ego. This means making conscious choices about how to rebuild your life, your relationships, and your sense of purpose based on your expanded awareness rather than your old, Conditioning. The research shows that people who successfully integrate ego-death experiences share common practices. They maintain some form of contemplative practice to stay connected to expanded awareness. They find community with others who understand their experience. They engage in meaningful work that serves something larger than themselves. And they develop what psychologists call flexible self-boundaries, the ability to move fluidly between different levels of identity as the situation requires. Marcus Aurelius mastered this flexibility. He could be the emperor when duty called, the philosopher when wisdom was needed, and the cosmic citizen when perspective was required. He never got trapped in any single identity, because he understood they were all temporary roles in a larger play. The question is, which role is your expanded self being called to play now? Asterisk, the Stoics' Guide to Conscious Rebirth, 4 Pillars of Post-Ego Integration. Asterisk, you've been through the fire. Your old self has dissolved. You've touched something infinite, and now you're standing in the ashes, wondering how to rebuild. Marcus Aurelius faced this exact moment countless times, and his approach was revolutionary. Don't try to go back to who you were. Instead, consciously construct who you're becoming. The emperor developed what he called the 4 disciplines for living after ego death, practices that modern neuroscience confirms actually rewire your brain for greater resilience, authenticity, and effectiveness. These aren't just philosophical concepts. They're practical tools for integrating transcendent awareness into human existence. Pillar 1. The discipline of perception. Marcus wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength after ego death." You've experienced firsthand that reality is far more fluid than you thought. The challenge is learning to navigate this fluidity without becoming road-debt. Modern research on neuroplasticity shows that people who practice metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe their thoughts without becoming identified with them, develop stronger prefrontal cortex function and better emotional regulation. This is exactly what Marcus was cultivating when he wrote his daily reflections. The practice is simple but profound. Several times throughout the day, pause and ask yourself, what story is my mind telling me right now, and how is that story affecting my nervous system? Notice the difference between experiencing an emotion and becoming that emotion. You feel angry. You are not anger itself. You experience sadness. You are not sadness itself. Dr. Dan Siegel at UCLA calls this the wheel of awareness, learning to identify with the hub of consciousness that observes all experiences rather than the rim where experiences arise and pass away. Marcus called it the view from the citadel, maintaining the perspective of the witness even while fully engaged in life. Pillar 2. The discipline of action. Here's where Marcus Aurelius was centuries ahead of his time. He understood that after ego death, you need to rebuild your relationship with action itself. The old self acted from fear, comparison, and the need for validation. The integrated self acts from love, service, and alignment with natural law. He wrote, "In the morning when thou risest unwillingly, let this thought be present. I am rising to the work of a human being." This isn't about forcing yourself to be productive. This is about recognizing that action itself can be a spiritual practice when it comes from the right place. Neuroscientist Dr. Judson Brewer's research on effortless effort shows that people who act from intrinsic motivation rather than external pressure show increased activity in brain networks associated with flow states and decreased activity in stress response systems. They literally become more effective while feeling less effortful. The practice, before taking any significant action, pause and ask, is this action coming from fear or love? Is it serving my highest good and the good of others? If the answer is no, either don't take the action or find a way to reframe it. That aligns with your values. Pillar 3. The discipline of desire. This is the big one. After ego death, your entire relationship with wanting changes. The old desires for status, approval, control feel hollow, but new desires emerge for authenticity, connection, meaning, service. Marcus called this learning to want what happens rather than trying to make what you want happen. Modern research on intrinsic motivation shows that people who pursue goals aligned with their core values show greater life satisfaction, better mental health, and more sustainable success than those pursuing goals based on external expectations. But here's the subtle part. Marcus mastered. This doesn't mean becoming passive or losing ambition. It means aligning your ambition with natural law rather than fighting against it. He wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In other words, don't let reactive patterns drive your choices. The practice: regularly examine your desires and ask, is this want coming from wholeness or from woundedness? Will fulfilling this desire serve my growth or just temporarily satisfy my ego? Learn to trust the desires that make you more generous, more courageous, and more authentic. Pillar 4. The discipline of connection. Marcus understood something that modern neuroscience confirms. We are fundamentally interconnected beings, and healthy ego integration requires healthy relationship. But after ego death, your capacity for relationship transforms. You become less needy, but more loving, less dependent, but more committed to the well-being of others. Research on secure attachment in adults shows that people who feel fundamentally safe in relationships show greater creativity, resilience, and life satisfaction. But this safety comes not from finding the perfect person, but from developing what psychologists call earned security, the ability to create safe connection regardless of your early experiences. The practice Marcus developed was radical. Treat every interaction as an opportunity to practice love without attachment to outcomes. Serve others without needing recognition. Speak truth without needing agreement. Show up fully without controlling how others respond. These 4 disciplines work together to create what Marcus called the sage's life, a way of being that's fully human and fully awakened simultaneously. Asterisk. Living as the awakened emperor, your new identity after ego death. Asterisk. So here you are. You've died and been reborn without leaving your body. You've seen through the illusion of the separate self and touched something infinite. You've learned to integrate transcendent awareness with human functionality. Now comes the ultimate question Marcus Aurelius spent his entire reign exploring. How do you live as both the emperor and the sage? How do you fully engage with your human role while never forgetting your cosmic nature? The answer changed everything for Marcus, and it can change everything for you too. He called it living as the awakened emperor, being fully committed to your human responsibilities while remaining unattached to the outcomes. It's about playing your role in the grand drama of life with complete dedication while never forgetting that it's ultimately just a role. Here's what this looks like in practice and why it's the most powerful way to live after ego death. You become radically present. Marcus wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." After ego death, you've experienced firsthand that the present moment is the only place where real life happens. The past exists only as memory, the future only as imagination. But the present is where your divine nature meets your human experience. Modern neuroscience shows that people who live in present moment awareness have lower cortisol levels, better immune function, increased creativity, and greater life satisfaction. But more importantly, they become what researchers call stress-resistant, but not stress-avoidant. They can handle life's challenges without being overwhelmed by them. You develop what Marcus called invincible virtue. This doesn't mean moral perfection. It means your behavior becomes aligned with your deepest values regardless of external circumstances. You tell the truth even when it's inconvenient. You show kindness even when others are cruel. You act with courage even when you're afraid. Why? Because you've realized that your sense of self isn't dependent on other people's responses. You're not performing goodness to maintain an image. You're expressing goodness because that's what feels most authentic to your expanded nature. You become simultaneously more human and more divine. Here's the paradox that blows most people's minds. After ego death, you don't become less human, you become more human. Your emotions become deeper, your compassion becomes wider, your capacity for joy becomes greater. But you're no longer enslaved by these experiences. You feel everything fully while being owned by nothing. Marcus described this as the divine spark clothed in flesh. You're still dealing with traffic, paying bills, having difficult conversations, experiencing loss and disappointment. But you're doing it all from a place of fundamental okayness that can't be touched by circumstances. You discover your unique gift to the world. After ego death, most people experience what psychologists call the call to service. A deep knowing that you're here not just for your own fulfillment, but to contribute something specific to the collective healing and evolution of humanity. For Marcus, that gift was conscious leadership, ruling an empire with wisdom and compassion rather than fear and force. For you, it might be conscious parenting, conscious business, conscious art, conscious healing, or conscious anything. The key is that it comes from inspiration rather than obligation, from love rather than guilt. You become comfortable with mystery. Perhaps most importantly, you stop needing to have life figured out. You've tasted the infinite, and you know it can't be captured in concepts or controlled through strategies. You learn to surf uncertainty rather than fight it, to dance with the unknown rather than fear it. Marcus wrote, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." After ego death, you realize that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived, and that shift in perspective changes everything. You stop trying to optimize your way to happiness and start allowing happiness to emerge naturally from alignment. You stop trying to control other people and start influencing them through your presence. You stop trying to escape your humanity and start celebrating it as the temporary gift it is. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." He wasn't advocating for positive thinking or denial. He was pointing to the deepest truth ego death reveals. You are not a separate self trying to get something from life. You are life itself, temporarily experiencing what it's like to be human. And that, my friend, changes absolutely everything. The question now isn't whether you can handle life after ego death. The question is, what will you create with this incredible gift of awakened humanity? Your real life is just beginning.